Hey guys, tonight we're going to dive deep into the life and music of one of the most influential figures in the world of music. If you've ever listened to Good Vibrations or felt the breezy vibes of California in a song, you already know who I'm talking about, Brian Wilson. But you may be thinking, I know him from the Beach Boys, but what's so special about him? Well, you're about to find out. This isn't just a tale about catchy tunes and summer fun. No, we're going to uncover something much deeper. A journey filled with brilliance, madness, and an emotional roller coaster that shaped the music world. Brian Wilson was more than just a part of a pop group. He was the genius behind it all. Tonight we'll unravel the layers of his story, from his rise to stardom to the groundbreaking contributions he made to pop music, and the emotional struggles that shaped both his music and his life. We're talking about a man who made music that transcends time, and whose emotional and creative genius is still influencing music today. But as you'll see, it wasn't always sunshine and rainbows in the life of Brian Wilson. For every good vibration or sunshine-filled melody, there were moments of deep struggle and creativity-driven isolation. So, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I promise this story is unlike any other. And don't forget to let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. Are you listening to this at night, or is it a bright morning for you? And of course, what's your all-time favorite Beach Boys song? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Because we're about to explore the life of a man who didn't just capture the essence of California in his music. He changed the landscape of pop music forever. And who knows, you might just discover a few things you didn't know about Brian Wilson. So sit back, relax, and let's start this incredible journey. Brian Wilson was born on June 20th, 1942 in Hawthorne, California. He grew up surrounded by music, but the journey to fame and genius wasn't exactly smooth sailing. The Beach Boys, of course, became one of the most iconic bands in pop music history, but it wasn't always easy for Brian. From the moment he picked up his first instrument, it was clear that he had a special gift. But like all stories of great success, it came with its share of trials. As we continue, you'll see how Brian's early life, his relationship with his father, and his deep connection to the California sound shaped not only his career, but the way he saw the world around him. Brian Wilson was born on June 20th, 1942, in Hawthorne, California, into a family that loved music but was not without its struggles. His mother, Audrey, was a dedicated and loving woman who encouraged creativity, but his father, Murray Wilson, was stern and employed a rather harsh style of parenting. Murray was not only a father, but also the first person to introduce Brian to music. However, Murray's approach to raising Brian often created tension within the family. He had extremely high expectations for his son, and this caused a lot of pressure for young Brian. Murray was a man who believed strongly in Brian's talent, but he lacked an understanding of Brian's emotional and psychological needs. While Brian was nurtured in a musical environment, the relationship with his father was far from easy. Murray's demands were sometimes unreasonable, and there were instances where Brian was harshly criticized for not meeting his father's expectations. This dynamic deeply impacted Brian's emotional well-being throughout his formative years. Even though Brian received a lot of musical training from his father, it came at a personal cost. The difficult relationship with Murray influenced how Brian viewed himself. He always felt that he was never good enough in his father's eyes, which heightened feelings of insecurity and anxiety that would persist throughout his life. In addition to the pressures within his family, Brian also faced social challenges. At the time, talented musicians like him were often treated in a somewhat rigid and demanding manner. Yet, these early difficulties helped to shape Brian into a resilient and determined individual, and music became the one place where he could find solace. Despite the hardships of his home life, these childhood years were critical in forming the foundation for Brian Wilson to eventually become a great musician. Though they left deep emotional scars, those experiences would drive him to pour his emotions and pain into the melodies he would later create. Even at a young age, Brian showed exceptional musical ability, playing the piano and composing his first melodies. These early tunes would later evolve and form the basis of his future work. While his childhood wasn't easy, it gave Brian the opportunity to overcome obstacles and eventually become one of the greatest musicians of the 20th century. The early 1960s marked a pivotal time for Brian Wilson, as he stepped into the spotlight with a group that would change the landscape of American pop music, the Beach Boys. Formed with his brothers Carl and Dennis, cousin Mike Love, and friend Al Jardine, the Beach Boys were initially just another band trying to capture the fun, carefree California vibe that was sweeping the world. However, Brian's vision for the group was far beyond the typical surf rock that dominated the charts at the time. Brian, who had already displayed his musical talent in private, quickly took the reins of the group. His natural gift for songwriting and arranging led him to write nearly every track for the band. The early days of the Beach Boys were marked by songs that captured the essence of California: beaches, hot rods, and the thrill of youth. Songs like Surfin' USA and I Get Around became national anthems for the sunny, carefree California lifestyle. The band's sound was polished and upbeat, filled with harmonies that made their music feel like the perfect soundtrack to a summer day. However, what set Brian apart from other musicians in the industry was his relentless pursuit of innovation. While the rest of the band was focused on touring and performing, Brian's mind was always turning, thinking about how he could make their music even better. He wanted to create something more meaningful, something beyond just catchy tunes. He began experimenting with new sounds, more complex harmonies, and intricate arrangements that would soon set him apart as one of the greatest musical minds of his generation. But even as the Beach Boys began to find success, Brian was facing personal struggles that were beginning to affect his work. The pressure from his father's high expectations still weighed heavily on him, and the increasing demands of being the lead creative force behind the band were beginning to take a toll. Despite these pressures, Brian's love for music and his vision for the Beach Boys kept him pushing forward, setting the stage for a groundbreaking era in his career. As the band gained popularity, Brian's desire to push musical boundaries became more apparent. He started to envision a new direction for the Beach Boys, one that would take them out of the surf genre and into the realm of art and experimentation. This shift in direction would eventually lead to one of the most revolutionary moments in pop music history: the creation of pet sounds. But before all that, the early days of the Beach Boys were just the beginning. They were a band at the height of the American pop culture revolution, and Brian was at the center of it all. The groundwork was being laid for what would become a legacy that would span decades and influence countless artists. The 1960s were a time of cultural upheaval, and in the middle of it all, the Beach Boys managed to capture the essence of American youth and California culture in their music. The band's rapid rise to fame was not just a result of catchy tunes and infectious harmonies, but also due to Brian Wilson's ability to craft music that spoke to the generation of the time. With hits like Surfin' USA and I Get Around, the Beach Boys quickly became synonymous with the carefree, sun-soaked image of California that was taking the world by storm. The song Surfin' USA, released in 1963, was an instant hit. It became an anthem for a generation of young people who were enamored with the surf culture that was sweeping the coast. The song's success helped cement the band's place in the pop music scene, but it also marked the beginning of Brian Wilson's evolution as a songwriter and producer. He was already beginning to experiment with musical forms that were more sophisticated than what the surf genre typically demanded. And it was this innovative spirit that would soon propel him into new creative territories. While Surfin' USA was a massive success, it was just the tip of the iceberg for Brian Wilson's ambitions. He was already looking beyond the surf genre, eager to push the boundaries of what pop music could achieve. His desire to evolve, to take the Beach Boys into uncharted territory, would become a defining feature of his career. Despite the band's early success and the joy of playing to massive crowds, Brian felt that their music, while fun and popular, wasn't reflecting the depth of emotion and creativity that he believed it could. The next few years saw a growing divide between Brian's creative ambitions and the more traditional pop expectations of the group. While his bandmates were happy with their chart-topping hits, Brian's mind was constantly racing, thinking of new ways to expand their sound. He began experimenting with different musical structures, harmonies, and instruments, attempting to create a sound that was not only unique but also deeply personal. This experimentation would eventually lead to Pet Sounds, the album that changed pop music forever. But it wasn't just the music that was evolving. As the band grew in popularity, so did the pressures. Brian's commitment to innovation was often met with resistance from his bandmates, who were not as eager to break away from the surf rock genre. The tension between Brian and the rest of the group grew as he became more focused on his artistic vision, which sometimes clashed with the band's desire for more of the same type of music that had brought them success. The constant pressure to produce hit after hit, combined with the growing demands on his creativity, started to take a toll on Brian's mental health. Despite these growing tensions, the Beach Boys' success continued to rise. Their tours were wildly successful, and they became one of the most influential bands in the world. But for Brian, the constant demand for success was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, the fame and recognition validated his talent, but on the other, it added pressure that would soon lead to a crisis in his personal and professional life. As much as Brian loved creating music, the weight of the expectations placed upon him started to weigh heavily on his psyche. And this was just the beginning of a series of challenges that would mark the next phase of his career. Brian Wilson's role in the Beach Boys was not just as a member of the band. He was the creative engine that powered their success. His songwriting, arranging, and production skills were unparalleled at the time, and his ability to combine lush harmonies with innovative instrumentation set him apart as one of the greatest musical minds of his generation. Yet, despite all the external success, he struggled internally with the demands of fame, the pressure to create, and the complexities of his mental health. As his internal battles intensified, the music that he was about to create would reflect the turbulence of his mind and the vast potential of his genius. As the Beach Boys rose to fame, Brian Wilson's vision for the band began to expand beyond the typical constraints of surf rock and pop. While the rest of the band was content with creating songs that fit the popular genre, Brian was beginning to develop a more complex and emotionally resonant sound. His ambition was clear. He wanted to create music that was not just catchy, but transformative. In 1966, this vision culminated in the release of Pet Sounds, an album that would forever change the course of pop music and cement Brian Wilson's status as one of the greatest musical minds of his time. Pet Sounds was a departure from the Beach Boys' previous hits. The album was an emotional and sonic exploration, filled with lush harmonies, intricate arrangements, and unconventional instruments. The use of unconventional studio techniques and instruments, such as the theremin, an instrument typically associated with eerie sci-fi sounds, set the album apart from anything else being created at the time. Brian's production techniques were revolutionary, and his desire to push the boundaries of what pop music could achieve resonated deeply within Pet Sounds. This was not just a pop album. Pet Sounds was an artistic statement, an album that sought to capture a broader, more complex emotional landscape. With tracks like Wouldn't It Be Nice and God Only Knows, Brian managed to blend themes of love, longing, and existential reflection with beautiful, layered harmonies that were unlike anything heard before. These songs were not just pop songs. They were reflections of the human condition, addressing the fears and desires that we all face, packaged in melodies that could soothe and elevate. But while Pet Sounds was groundbreaking in its creativity, it wasn't an immediate commercial success. The public was not yet ready for this shift in pop music. Many fans and critics were initially confused by the complexity of the album. It was unlike anything that had come before it in mainstream music. Critics, however, began to recognize its brilliance, and Pet Sounds quickly gained the status it holds today as one of the greatest albums ever made. The album was praised for its musical innovation and emotional depth, and its influence is still felt today from modern pop to indie music. Despite the critical acclaim, the creation of Pet Sounds had taken a heavy toll on Brian. The intense pressure he had placed on himself to create something truly exceptional, combined with his ongoing struggles with mental health, led to a period of isolation. Brian's obsession with the album was so complete that he found it difficult to continue performing with the band. He was increasingly withdrawing from public life, and, at the height of the Beach Boys' success, began to retreat to the safety of his studio, where he could experiment freely without the pressures of live performance. While Brian withdrew from touring, the Beach Boys continued to work as a band. However, the dynamic was changing. As Brian's vision evolved and his musical ambitions grew more complicated, tensions began to surface. His bandmates, especially Mike Love, were not always on board with the direction Brian was taking. Mike Love, in particular, was vocal about wanting to stick to the band's roots in surf rock. This created a divide between Brian and the rest of the Beach Boys as his creative vision became more experimental, while the rest of the group wanted to continue riding the wave of the pop hits that had made them famous. The tensions between Brian and his bandmates reached their peak during the production of Smile, a follow-up to Pet Sounds. Smile was to be another ambitious experimental project that would push the boundaries of music even further. Brian had big ideas for Smile, wanting to incorporate symphonic elements, complex arrangements, and lyrical themes that explored a wide range of subjects. However, the stress of creating this ambitious album, along with the emotional strain he was under, led to the project's collapse. After months of work, Brian abandoned Smile and the album was never officially released. The collapse of Smile marked a turning point in Brian's career as he spiraled into a period of deep personal and professional crisis. While Pet Sounds had elevated Brian to a new level of artistic recognition, it also led to a sense of burnout. He was caught between his artistic desires and the expectations of both his bandmates and his fans. It became increasingly difficult for Brian to reconcile his desire to create groundbreaking music with the pressures of success and the need to maintain the image of the Beach Boys as a commercial entity. His mind, once full of boundless creativity, became clouded by the weight of these conflicting forces. In the years that followed, Brian's mental health continued to deteriorate, and his creative output slowed dramatically. He struggled with depression, anxiety, and substance abuse, and became increasingly reclusive. Despite this, his influence on music remained undeniable. Artists from the Beatles to David Bowie acknowledged Brian Wilson's genius and the profound impact of Pet Sounds in his other works. Brian Wilson had become a tragic hero in the world of music, a brilliant and tortured soul whose contributions were vast, yet whose personal struggles cast a long shadow over his career. If Pet Sounds was the album that solidified Brian Wilson's status as a musical genius, then Good Vibrations was the single that made him a household name. Released in 1966, Good Vibrations was not just another hit for the Beach Boys. It was a groundbreaking piece of music that took pop music to a new level. At the time, few could have predicted that a song about the feeling of positive energy or vibrations could have such a lasting impact on both the musical world and popular culture. Brian Wilson had always been obsessed with creating something new, something different, and Good Vibrations was his answer. The song was unlike anything anyone had heard before. The unconventional structure of the song, with its numerous key changes and time signature shifts, was revolutionary. Brian took an unprecedented approach to the recording process, with over 90 hours spent in the studio perfecting each element. He used a vast array of instruments, including the theremin, which gave the song its distinctive, eerie sound. The song was layered with intricate harmonies and arrangements, and it felt like nothing else that had come before it. But what really made Good Vibrations stand out wasn't just its innovative production, it was its emotional depth. The song tapped into a feeling that everyone could relate to, the feeling of positive energy or vibrations. It was a feeling of freedom, possibility, and of hope, all wrapped up in a melody that seemed to transport the listener to another world. It was a perfect blend of the experimental and the accessible, the intellectual and the universal. And when the song hit #1 on the charts, it validated all of Brian Wilson's creative decisions and cemented his place in musical history. However, despite the song's massive success, Brian Wilson's internal struggles were beginning to take their toll. His obsession with perfection and his desire to create the ultimate pop song had left him physically and mentally exhausted. The pressures of being the creative force behind both the Beach Boys and Good Vibrations were starting to take a heavy toll on his mental health. He was suffering from anxiety, depression, and paranoia, which made it increasingly difficult for him to function. While Good Vibrations was an immense success, it was also a symbol of the growing divide between Brian and the rest of the band. The other members of the Beach Boys, especially Mike Love, were frustrated by Brian's new direction. They wanted to stick to the formula that had worked for them in the past: surf rock and fun, catchy pop songs. Brian, on the other hand, was no longer interested in writing just another hit. He wanted to create something that would leave a lasting legacy, something that would change the world of music. This creative divide would soon lead to tensions within the band. As Brian became more consumed by his creative vision, he withdrew from the band and began to focus entirely on his solo work. It was around this time that he began to distance himself from performing live shows with the Beach Boys, preferring instead to stay in the studio, where he could experiment with new sounds and ideas without the pressure of a live audience. Good Vibrations marked the peak of Brian's success in the public eye, but behind the scenes, his personal battles were intensifying. The success of the song was bittersweet for Brian. It was a validation of his genius, but it also deepened his sense of isolation. He had achieved everything he had ever dreamed of as a musician, but the cost of that success was beginning to take its toll on him, emotionally and mentally. Despite all the chaos that was brewing in his personal life, Good Vibrations would go on to become one of the most iconic songs of the 1960s, a timeless classic that would continue to influence generations of musicians. And in the years to come, people would look back on the song as one of the defining moments in pop music history. A moment when Brian Wilson's creativity reached its peak, and his genius was recognized worldwide. But for Brian, the road ahead was not without its struggles. The overwhelming success of Good Vibrations and his role as the leader of the Beach Boys would soon lead him to a breaking point. With the pressures of fame, family expectations, and his own inner demons weighing heavily on him, Brian Wilson's journey was about to take a dark turn. As the success of Good Vibrations and Pet Sounds solidified Brian Wilson's place as a groundbreaking force in music, it also marked the beginning of a more difficult chapter in his life. Despite the overwhelming recognition and praise, Brian's mental health was deteriorating. The pressures of being the creative mastermind behind the Beach Boys, the weight of expectation from both the public and his bandmates, and the toll of personal issues left him in a constant state of anxiety and confusion. It was at this point that Brian Wilson, who had once been the heart and soul of the band, began to withdraw into himself, both personally and creatively. Brian's relationship with his father, Murray, had left a deep scar on his psyche. While Murray had pushed him to be the best, it had come at the cost of Brian's emotional well-being. Brian was constantly seeking approval, yet he could never seem to meet the lofty expectations set before him. This sense of never being good enough contributed to his growing sense of inadequacy and self-doubt, feelings that would plague him throughout his life. In addition to the psychological pressures, the world around Brian was rapidly changing. The cultural and musical landscape of the 1960s was evolving, and the demands for new, innovative music were unrelenting. Brian, however, found himself increasingly overwhelmed. The creative pressure, coupled with his personal insecurities, began to manifest in physical and mental exhaustion. He had pushed himself to the breaking point, both creatively and emotionally, and it was becoming harder for him to keep up with the fast-paced demands of fame. During this time, Brian also became increasingly reliant on substances, including prescription drugs, to cope with the overwhelming stress. His struggles with addiction and his deteriorating mental health created a perfect storm of isolation and self-doubt. Brian had become a prisoner of his own success, unable to escape the overwhelming pressures he had placed on himself, and unable to reconcile his inner turmoil with the image of the perfect pop star that the world had come to expect. As a result, Brian made the difficult decision to withdraw from live performances with the Beach Boys. While his bandmates were out on the road, continuing to perform their hits, Brian remained in the studio where he became obsessed with his new projects. His creative energy turned inward, and he focused solely on creating music that he felt was more meaningful. music that would express his personal emotions and experiences. This isolation, however, only deepened his struggles with depression and anxiety. The growing tension between Brian and the rest of the band was palpable. His bandmates, particularly Mike Love, grew frustrated with Brian's absence and his increasing withdrawal from the group. They wanted to continue making music that reflected the image of carefree beach parties and fun in the sun. Brian, on the other hand, was no longer interested in making beach music. He wanted to explore more complex, introspective themes in his music, his own fears, insecurities, and the emotional weight he carried. As the band drifted apart creatively, Brian's isolation deepened, and his mental health continued to spiral downward. While Brian's mental health struggles were becoming more visible, the music he was creating was becoming more experimental and ambitious. He started working on the Smile project, which he envisioned as a groundbreaking album that would push the boundaries of pop music even further. However, the pressures of creating something revolutionary, coupled with his declining mental state, made it increasingly difficult for him to finish the project. Brian's inability to complete Smile and his growing sense of despair were signs of how deeply he was struggling. The album that was meant to be his magnum opus became a symbol of the creative brilliance that was, at the time, slipping through his fingers. Smile was never officially completed, and much of the work was discarded or locked away in the vaults of Brian's mind. This period of creative stagnation was a painful reminder of the toll that fame, pressure, and personal struggles had taken on the brilliant mind behind the Beach Boys. But despite the emotional and mental turmoil, there was still a part of Brian that clung to his passion for music. Even as he withdrew from the public eye, he continued to create, to experiment, and to explore new sounds. Though the world may not have seen the full extent of his struggles, those who were closest to him knew that Brian Wilson was a man torn between his genius and the weight of the world he had built around him. In the late 1960s, Brian Wilson's mental state continued to deteriorate. His obsession with perfection, compounded by the pressure to follow up the groundbreaking success of Pet Sounds, was taking its toll. His mind was racing, his creative output was erratic, and the stress of trying to produce another groundbreaking album was overwhelming. This pressure ultimately led to the collapse of one of the most ambitious musical projects ever conceived: Smile. What began as a hopeful and transformative project for Brian soon became a source of great personal turmoil. Smile was supposed to be the follow-up to Pet Sounds, an album that Brian envisioned as a symphonic, complex work of art that would break all the boundaries of pop music. He poured everything into it: his creative energy, his emotions, and his desire to create something that would surpass anything ever made before. The project began in earnest in 1966, but as the months passed, Brian became more isolated, more stressed, and more determined to create the perfect album. But Smile wasn't just an album, it was a reflection of Brian's own internal struggles. As he worked on the project, he began to lose touch with reality. The pressure of trying to create something revolutionary was too much for him to bear. The recording sessions for Smile were plagued by delays, disagreements with his bandmates, and Brian's worsening mental health. The constant back and forth in the studio only added to his confusion and frustration. He became more erratic, more detached from the project, and eventually Smile began to fall apart. As the months went by, Brian's emotional state continued to spiral. The constant tension between his vision for the album and the realities of his mental state made it impossible for him to finish the project. The once thriving collaboration with the Beach Boys became increasingly strained. Brian, exhausted and overwhelmed, abandoned the album halfway through its creation. Smile was never completed. The work that Brian had hoped would be his magnum opus was left unfinished, and much of the material was shelved, never to be released in its intended form. For Brian, this was a devastating moment. The collapse of Smile marked the beginning of a period of deep depression and creative paralysis. His bandmates, frustrated by the delays and the absence of the album, began to lose faith in Brian's vision. Meanwhile, Brian's personal life was also unraveling. The mental and emotional toll of his work on Smile left him feeling completely drained, both physically and emotionally. Despite the collapse of Smile, the music that Brian had created during this time wasn't without its brilliance. Many of the songs that were originally intended for Smile would later be released in various forms, but they were incomplete, fragmented pieces of a larger, untold story. For years, the album remained one of the great lost albums of rock and roll history, a tantalizing glimpse into the mind of a genius on the brink of collapse. The collapse of Smile wasn't just a creative failure, it was a personal one. For Brian Wilson, it marked the end of an era. He had tried to push the boundaries of music to create something that was truly revolutionary, but in doing so, he had stretched himself beyond his limits. The pressure of fame, the emotional struggles, and the constant creative demands had taken their toll. Brian Wilson, the man who had once been on top of the music world, was now facing a battle that he wasn't sure he could win. As the 1960s came to a close, the Beach Boys continued to tour and release albums, but they were no longer the band they had once been. Brian, despite his unparalleled creativity, was increasingly absent from the group. He retreated into himself, and the rest of the band moved forward without him. It was a heartbreaking and painful chapter in Brian's life, a time when his genius was overshadowed by the weight of his mental health struggles and the pressures of fame. But even in the darkest moments of his life, Brian Wilson's story was far from over. His genius, though struggling to break free, was not gone. His music, though fractured and incomplete, would continue to resonate with those who understood the depth of his creativity. As Smile remained unfinished and lost in the annals of music history, Brian Wilson's journey was just beginning, a journey filled with both personal despair and the hope of creative renewal. As Brian Wilson's creative brilliance became overshadowed by the immense emotional strain he was enduring, his life took a turn toward a darker path. In the years following the collapse of Smile, Brian retreated from the public eye. He stopped touring with the Beach Boys and became increasingly isolated. The pressures of success, coupled with his declining mental health, led to a breakdown that no one, not even those closest to him, could have fully predicted. Brian was battling depression, anxiety, and a growing sense of paranoia. These struggles were exacerbated by substance abuse, which further clouded his judgment and affected his physical health. At the peak of his troubles, Brian spent much of his time confined to his home or in the safety of his studio, unable or unwilling to confront the outside world. The bright and carefree music that he once produced now seemed a world away from the person he had become. The creative drive that had once been so strong now felt like a distant memory, replaced by overwhelming self-doubt and fear. The person who would eventually help Brian begin his long road to recovery was Dr. Eugene Landy, a controversial therapist who was hired by Brian's family in the early 1970s. Landy had a reputation for using unorthodox methods in his treatment, and he became a dominant figure in Brian's life. Under Landy's supervision, Brian's health began to stabilize, but the relationship between the two was far from healthy. Landy exerted an enormous amount of control over Brian, managing every aspect of his personal and professional life. While the therapy did help Brian regain some level of stability, it also contributed to his ongoing sense of dependency and isolation. During this period, Brian's family, particularly his brothers Carl and Dennis, continued to worry about his well-being. Dennis, in particular, was deeply concerned about Brian's struggles and tried to intervene, encouraging him to return to music. Despite the internal and external pressures, Brian slowly began to find his way back to his passion for creating music. However, this was no longer the same Brian who had once been at the forefront of the music world. His creativity had been stifled, his sense of self was fractured, and his desire to perform and share his music with the world had waned. Despite the difficulties, there were moments of light during this dark time. Brian did manage to write and record sporadically, and in 1977, he released Brian Wilson, his first solo album. While not a commercial success, the album was a personal triumph for Brian, as it represented his attempt to reconnect with the creative drive that had once defined him. The album showcased some of the old brilliance that Brian had cultivated during his peak years, but it also revealed the scars of his struggles. The haunting lyrics and introspective sound reflected the years of pain and isolation he had endured. Brian Wilson was a symbol of hope for Brian, even if it wasn't a massive success in the way Pet Sounds had been. Throughout this recovery period, Brian continued to deal with ongoing mental health challenges. His relationship with Dr. Landy became increasingly strained, and eventually the therapist's control over Brian's life was deemed to be too extreme, leading to a legal battle that resulted in Landy being removed from Brian's life in the early 1990s. It was only after this period of intensive therapy and years of recovery that Brian began to regain control over his life and his career. This phase of Brian's life was a difficult one, filled with setbacks and struggles. Yet it was also marked by moments of great personal strength. Slowly but surely, Brian started to reclaim his voice. He began to work again, creating new music and performing live for the first time in years. The road to recovery wasn't easy, but it was necessary for Brian to begin the process of rebuilding his legacy. Despite the challenges, Brian's story was not one of defeat. He had endured immense hardship, but he was still here, still creating and still influencing the world of music. His comeback wasn't immediate, but over time he found his way back to the stage, bringing with him a wealth of knowledge, pain, and beauty. As he slowly regained his sense of self, he was able to share his struggles with his fans through his music, offering a more personal and raw version of himself than ever before. After years of battling depression, substance abuse, and the pressures of fame, Brian Wilson began to reclaim his life and career, but it was not without immense difficulty. His journey to recovery was long and fraught with personal challenges, but it would eventually lead to one of the most remarkable comebacks in music history. The album that had once been abandoned, Smile, would later be revisited and completed, marking a new chapter in Brian's career. The story of Smile is one of both triumph and tragedy. Initially conceived as the follow-up to Pet Sounds, Smile was meant to be Brian's magnum opus, a deeply personal and ambitious project that would push the boundaries of pop music even further. It was to be a sprawling, experimental album with themes that ranged from American history to the human experience. But as the pressures mounted and Brian's mental health deteriorated, the project was abandoned, leaving behind only fragments of what could have been. For decades, Smile remained a symbol of the great lost album in pop music history. But in the late 1990s, something remarkable happened. Brian Wilson, now free from the grip of Dr. Eugene Landy and having spent years recovering from his emotional and psychological struggles, decided to revisit Smile. With the help of his band and collaborators, Brian began working on completing the album, something he had dreamed of doing for years. The result was Brian Wilson Presents Smile, a completed version of the album that captured Brian's original vision, but also reflected his personal growth and recovery. The release of Brian Wilson Presents Smile in 2004 was a defining moment in Brian's career. The album was met with critical acclaim, and fans who had waited decades for its completion finally heard the full version of Brian's masterpiece. The music was as innovative as it had been in the 1960s, filled with lush harmonies, intricate arrangements, and the deep emotional resonance that had always been a hallmark of Brian's work. However, there was something different about this version of Smile. It was more introspective, more vulnerable, and reflected the years of struggle that Brian had gone through. The songs were no longer just a creative experiment. They were a testament to Brian's resilience and his ability to overcome adversity. For Brian Wilson, the release of Smile was a personal victory. It marked the culmination of years of pain, creativity, and self-discovery. It was a moment of redemption for an artist who had once been at the brink of losing everything. But it was also a moment of clarity for Brian as he saw how far he had come. The man who had once been isolated, struggling to finish his work, was now standing tall, proudly sharing his music with the world. For Brian, Smile wasn't just an album, it was a reflection of his journey, a story of perseverance, and a triumph over the forces that had once held him back. The comeback didn't stop with Smile. In the years that followed, Brian continued to tour, perform, and record new music. He began to rebuild his career, regaining the confidence that had been lost during his years of struggle. Brian's return to live performances was particularly significant. For many years, he had shied away from the stage, consumed by his mental health issues and the fear of facing an audience. But now he was able to perform his music in front of crowds once again, sharing his genius with the world in a way that was deeply moving for both him and his fans. Brian's resurgence was met with a renewed sense of respect and admiration from the music industry. His influence on modern musicians was undeniable, and his status as a true musical innovator was firmly re-established. Artists from all genres cited Brian Wilson as a major influence, and his work was once again recognized as some of the most important in the history of popular music. Through his perseverance, Brian Wilson showed the world that even after years of struggle, it was possible to rebuild and find redemption. His music had always been about emotional depth, but his own story had become even more poignant. A tale of a man who had faced his demons, overcome them, and come out the other side stronger than ever. Brian Wilson was no longer just the tortured genius. He was a living testament to the power of music and the human spirit. Brian Wilson's journey, marked by both brilliance and hardship, has left an indelible mark on the music world. His ability to blend complex musical structures with emotional depth has inspired generations of musicians across various genres. His influence stretches far beyond his own body of work with the Beach Boys and his solo albums. It permeates the very foundation of pop music itself, shaping the sounds of countless artists who came after him. While Pet Sounds and Smile are considered some of his greatest achievements, Brian's impact on music cannot be measured solely by these iconic albums. It is his role as a pioneer of music production, songwriting, and arrangement that continues to resonate today. He changed the way we think about pop music, elevating it from simple entertainment to an art form capable of expressing complex emotions, philosophical musings, and even the struggles of the human condition. His experimentation with studio techniques, such as multi-track recording, unconventional instruments, and layered harmonies, set a new standard for what could be achieved in the studio. Brian's influence is seen not only in the sound of modern pop music, but also in the approach that artists take when recording their work. His meticulous attention to detail, his desire to create something lasting, and his refusal to accept mediocrity in his music inspired generations of musicians to push their boundaries and strive for innovation. Artists like Paul McCartney of the Beatles, David Bowie, and contemporary acts like Animal Collective, Fleet Foxes, and Beach House have all cited Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys as key influences in their music. But Brian's influence goes beyond just the sound of his music. It's in the emotional weight that his songs carry. From God Only Knows to Wouldn't It Be Nice, Brian's ability to express universal human emotions, love, loss, longing, and joy, through his lyrics and melodies is what has kept his music timeless. His songs are more than just notes on a page. They are windows into the human experience. When you listen to Brian's music, you hear not just a pop song, but a piece of his soul, his struggles, and his triumphs. It is important to note that the music industry's initial reluctance to embrace Brian Wilson's vision was not a reflection of his lack of talent or ability. Rather, it was the result of his refusal to conform to the norms of the time. In a world where the success of pop music was often defined by catchy, formulaic songs and an easy-to-digest sound, Brian's work was revolutionary. It was risky, complex, and often too ahead of its time. His vision was sometimes misunderstood, and his journey was often marked by rejection, both from within the industry and from his own bandmates. However, history has since caught up with Brian, and his legacy as one of the greatest minds in music history has been solidified. What makes Brian's story even more powerful is his resilience in the face of adversity. The very struggles that nearly cost him his career and his life are the same struggles that shaped the depth and beauty of his music. His battles with mental health, addiction, and isolation didn't define him as an artist. They became a part of his artistry. Today, Brian Wilson is seen as a symbol of perseverance and creative brilliance. His journey serves as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is the potential for artistic rebirth and personal transformation. Despite his personal challenges, Brian Wilson continues to create and perform, still sharing his music with the world. He is not just a figure of the past, but a living legend whose music still resonates with people of all ages. His influence is not confined to any particular era. Rather, it extends across time, touching the hearts and minds of listeners everywhere. In every live show, every album release, and every interview, Brian Wilson proves that the power of music can transcend the struggles of the human experience. His legacy is not just in the songs he wrote, but in the way he has inspired and shaped the direction of modern music. Brian Wilson has become more than just the leader of the Beach Boys. He is a visionary who showed the world that music is not just about entertainment. It's about connection, emotion, and the ability to speak to the soul. As we look back on Brian Wilson's career, it's clear that his influence will continue to shape music for generations to come. His work has given us some of the most beautiful and timeless songs ever written, and his journey reminds us of the transformative power of creativity. Brian Wilson is not just a musician, he is a living testament to the enduring power of art, resilience, and the pursuit of creative truth. As Brian Wilson's career continued to soar, his personal life remained a tangled web of struggles, relationships, and emotional battles. Behind the brilliance of his music and the success of the Beach Boys, Brian was facing a series of personal challenges that few could have imagined. His music may have captured the essence of California's carefree, sun-soaked lifestyle, but his personal life was far from idyllic. Brian's first marriage to Marilyn Rovell in 1964 was a brief yet pivotal chapter in his life. Marilyn, who was also a member of the girl group The Honeys, was a supportive partner at first. However, their relationship quickly deteriorated as Brian's mental health began to unravel. As his mental state worsened and his struggles with addiction intensified, Marilyn found herself increasingly unable to cope with Brian's behavior. The stress of caring for an emotionally fragile partner eventually took its toll on their marriage, leading to their divorce in 1979. Brian's second marriage to songwriter and psychologist Carleen Candace Neuwirth in the early 1980s was equally challenging. Though Brian was in the midst of his recovery, his relationships were always complicated by his mental health struggles and the difficulties of managing fame. His dependency on therapists like Dr. Eugene Landy, whom Brian had a highly problematic relationship with, compounded the strain in his personal life. Landy's manipulative control over Brian, dictating nearly every aspect of his day-to-day existence, severely impacted his ability to function as an independent person. It was not until years later that Brian broke free from Landy's influence and began to regain control over his life and relationships. Despite his personal turmoil, Brian found solace in his music. As he navigated through the ups and downs of his emotional and psychological health, music became both a sanctuary and an outlet for his inner struggles. It was through the act of creating that he could express the deep, unspoken emotions that often eluded him in his personal life. His third marriage to Melinda Ledbetter in 1995 would prove to be a stabilizing force for Brian. Melinda, a former car saleswoman, became Brian's partner not only in life but also in his journey of healing. She helped him rediscover his passion for music, and together they began a new chapter in Brian's life, one that would see him return to the stage and reclaim his career. The bond between Brian and Melinda was unique and transformative. It was through her unwavering support and love that Brian began to break free from the chains of his past. Melinda helped Brian regain his independence and, in many ways, helped him heal emotionally. The pair's relationship served as a testament to Brian's ability to rediscover love and connection, despite the challenges he had faced throughout his life. The two would later marry in 1995, and their partnership would prove instrumental in helping Brian continue his work in music. Despite all the turmoil in his personal life, Brian remained an artist who was deeply committed to his craft. His relationships were often difficult and fraught with tension, but his music remained a constant source of solace and expression. His family, especially his brothers Carl and Dennis, were also deeply concerned about his well-being, and they played a key role in supporting Brian during his darkest times. Dennis, in particular, became a protector for Brian, trying to shield him from the pressures of fame and the destructive forces that were slowly taking hold of his life. Tragically, Dennis Wilson drowned in 1983, a loss that deeply affected Brian and left a permanent void in his life. The death of his brother was another profound personal tragedy, and it marked the beginning of a long period of grief and mourning for Brian. Though Brian's personal life was filled with hardship, the people around him helped him rebuild his life and career, and in doing so, they allowed him to continue sharing his music with the world. His ability to overcome personal struggles, particularly through his marriage to Melinda, helped Brian find a sense of peace and balance in his later years. While he would never fully escape the scars of his past, Brian's personal and emotional journey, much like his music, was a testament to resilience, the healing power of love, and the belief that even in the darkest moments, creativity could provide an outlet for healing. Brian Wilson's story is ultimately one of triumph and perseverance. It's the story of a man who faced profound personal challenges but continued to create music that touched the hearts of millions. His life has been filled with moments of darkness, but through it all, his art has shone brightly, illuminating the path for the future generations of musicians and fans alike. Despite the personal struggles that weighed heavily on Brian Wilson for decades, his work as a musician, composer, and producer has ultimately been recognized as some of the most important in the history of popular music. Over the years, as Brian's mental health issues began to stabilize and he found his footing again, he received a tremendous amount of recognition for his groundbreaking contributions to the music industry. What makes his story even more remarkable is that much of the recognition came after a long period of personal suffering. A comeback that not only reaffirmed his genius, but also introduced him to a whole new generation of music lovers. Brian's recognition as a musical genius began to truly take shape in the late 1980s and early 1990s. While his influence had never fully waned, his music had somewhat fallen into obscurity for those outside the devoted fan base. As the music industry evolved and newer generations of artists rose to prominence, Brian's earlier work was increasingly recognized as the cornerstone of the modern pop landscape. His production techniques, songwriting innovations, and genre-blurring experiments would go on to influence artists in various genres, from rock to indie to electronic music. In 1988, Brian Wilson received a major milestone in his career when he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of the Beach Boys. The honor came as part of a wave of renewed interest in the band's music and in Brian's legacy as a visionary in the music industry. Being inducted into the Hall of Fame was a moment of validation for Brian, as it marked a public acknowledgement of his artistic genius after years of isolation and personal struggles. It was a chance for the world to finally recognize the groundbreaking work that had so often been overlooked. But the recognition didn't stop there. In the years following, Brian received multiple Grammy Awards, including a special Grammy Award for Lifetime Achievement in 2001. His influence was so profound that even contemporary pop and rock stars began to openly acknowledge his role in shaping the music of the 20th century. Paul McCartney of the Beatles, one of Brian's biggest admirers, frequently expressed his admiration for Brian's work, particularly Pet Sounds, which was an album that inspired McCartney to think differently about the possibilities of pop music. Other artists, such as David Bowie and Elton John, also spoke about how Brian's work shaped their own musical careers. One of the most defining moments of Brian's post-recovery career came in 2004, when he finally completed Smile, the very album that had once eluded him and remained an enigmatic piece of pop music history. After decades of anticipation, Brian Wilson Presents Smile was released to widespread acclaim. It was as if the world had finally caught up to Brian's vision from nearly 40 years earlier. The album was not only a creative triumph, but it was also a deeply personal victory for Brian. It represented the culmination of years of pain, struggle, and creative vision, and its release proved to the world that Brian's genius was not just a thing of the past, it was still alive and well. The critical success of Smile reaffirmed Brian's place as one of the greatest musical minds in history. Brian's success as a solo artist continued with the release of albums such as Lucky Old Son, 2008, and No Peer Pressure, 2015, both of which demonstrated his continued growth as an artist. As Brian re-entered the spotlight, his live performances, too, became a vital part of his return to the world of music. For the first time in many years, Brian Wilson began to perform Pet Sounds in its entirety, taking his fans on a journey back to the album that had made such an impact on popular music. Touring again was a cathartic experience for Brian, allowing him to share his music with fans who had been waiting decades for the opportunity to see the man behind some of the greatest songs in pop music history. Perhaps one of the most poignant moments of recognition came in 2013, when Brian received the prestigious Kennedy Center Honors. The Kennedy Center Honors are awarded to individuals who have made significant contributions to the cultural heritage of the United States, and Brian's recognition was a reflection of his profound impact on American music. The ceremony, which was attended by former bandmates, fellow musicians, and countless admirers, was a moment of celebration for Brian. It was an acknowledgement of his life's work, and a testament to the resilience of the artist who had been through so much but still emerged to leave an indelible mark on the world. But for Brian, these awards and accolades were more than just a public acknowledgement. They were a validation of his lifelong pursuit of creative excellence. As he stood at the podium accepting his honors, Brian reflected on the difficult journey that had brought him to this point. The battles with mental health, the period.
As the decades have passed, Brian Wilson has remained a vital and beloved figure in the world of music. His story, which includes monumental highs and devastating lows, has become a symbol of resilience and creative brilliance. Today, Brian is not just a legendary figure of the past, but an active force in the music world, still performing, still writing, and still influencing new generations of artists. Brian's return to the stage in the late 1990s and early 2000s marked the start of a new chapter in his life. After years of isolation, mental health struggles, and creative challenges, he re-emerged as a performer and artist, giving live performances of Pet Sounds and Smile that sent waves through his fan base. The joy that Brian brought to the stage was evident in every note, and the connection he forged with his audience was deeply personal. Fans who had long awaited his return, who had spent years celebrating his music from afar, were finally able to see the man behind the genius live in concert. While Brian has faced many challenges in his personal and professional life, he has found a sense of balance in his later years. His marriage to Melinda Ledbetter, whom he wed in 1995, has been a stabilizing force in his life. Melinda played a crucial role in helping Brian recover from the years of mental health struggles and substance abuse. She supported him in his journey to regain control of his career and his personal life, and together, they have built a life filled with love, music, and mutual respect. One of the most remarkable aspects of Brian's later years is his ability to continue creating music that resonates with people. His work today, though different from his earlier work, still carries the essence of his genius, his intricate melodies, lush harmonies, and introspective lyrics. Brian's later albums, including No Peer Pressure, 2015, and Reimagine's Gershwin, 2010, showcase his enduring creative spirit. Though these albums explore different musical territories, they still bear the unmistakable signature of Brian Wilson's artistry. He may not be the same young man who first created Pet Sounds or Good Vibrations, but his passion for music remains as strong as ever. As he continues to perform, Brian also remains deeply involved in his legacy. He is still regarded as one of the greatest songwriters and producers in history, and his influence is still felt in contemporary music. Artists like Paul McCartney, Elton John, and contemporary acts such as Animal Collective and Fleet Foxes continue to cite Brian Wilson as a major influence on their music. The emotional depth and complexity of his songs are unparalleled, and his ability to convey human experience through music has shaped the way that modern pop and rock are understood and created. Beyond his music, Brian has become a figure of inspiration for anyone who has faced mental health struggles or personal adversity. His story proves that even after decades of personal turmoil, it is possible to rise again and find healing. He has shown the world that even when faced with the most difficult circumstances, the human spirit can endure and create something beautiful. Brian Wilson is a living testament to the power of music, perseverance, and the ability to overcome one's demons. In 2021, Brian Wilson celebrated his 79th birthday, still working, still creating, and still making an impact on the world of music. The years may have passed, but the heart of Brian Wilson, the man who reshaped pop music, is still beating strong. His contributions to music have influenced countless artists and touched the hearts of millions. His legacy, built on albums like Pet Sounds, Smile, and Good Vibrations, remains timeless, and his music will continue to inspire new generations for years to come. Despite his age and the struggles of his past, Brian Wilson is not slowing down. He is actively involved in his creative process, still writing and composing music that speaks to the soul. His recent work, both in the studio and on stage, showcases his ever-evolving artistry. And while Brian may not be the same person he was in the 1960s, the essence of his creativity, his love for music, his passion for innovation, and his deep emotional connection to his art has remained unchanged. Brian Wilson is not just a legend of the past. He is a living, breathing artist whose influence continues to ripple through the music world. His story is not one of decline, but one of perseverance, creativity, and hope. The music he has given us will remain, an everlasting reminder of the power of artistic expression and the resilience of the human spirit. Brian Wilson's life and work represent the intersection of extraordinary creative genius and personal struggle. His journey from the bright, sunny melodies of Surfin' USA to the complex, emotionally profound compositions of Pet Sounds and Smile has been nothing short of a musical revolution. Yet it is his resilience, through years of personal turmoil, health struggles, and creative crises, that makes his legacy truly remarkable. While many artists have come and gone, Brian Wilson's music continues to influence new generations of musicians and fans, ensuring that his contributions to pop music remain timeless. As one of the founding members of the Beach Boys, Brian was responsible for shaping the sound of not only the band, but of an entire era. His ability to blend innovative studio techniques with emotionally charged songwriting set a new standard for pop music. Pet Sounds, regarded by many as the greatest album ever made, pushed the boundaries of what pop music could achieve. It was no longer just about catchy tunes and feel-good vibes, it was about deep emotional connection, complex arrangements, and thematic richness. Through songs like God Only Knows and Wouldn't It Be Nice, Brian Wilson elevated pop music into the realm of high art. However, Brian's influence goes far beyond just the music he created with the Beach Boys. His work as a producer, arranger, and composer inspired countless artists across genres. His pioneering use of multi-track recording, unconventional instruments, and complex vocal harmonies revolutionized the way records were made. Without Brian Wilson's innovative techniques, the sounds of the Beatles, particularly in their later work, might not have existed. Paul McCartney has often cited Pet Sounds as a major influence on the Beatles' own experimental work, including Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The ripple effect of Brian's creativity stretched through rock and pop into indie, alternative, and experimental music, impacting generations of musicians. Brian's musical legacy is not just measured in albums or songs. It's in the way his music makes people feel. The emotional depth of his songwriting resonates deeply with fans, making his music more than just entertainment. It is a soundtrack for the human experience, addressing universal themes of love, longing, and loss. His ability to express complex emotions in such accessible ways is a testament to his mastery as a songwriter and producer. Even in his most challenging years, when his personal life seemed to be in shambles, Brian's ability to create music that spoke to the soul never wavered. And yet, despite all the accolades, awards, and recognition, Brian Wilson's true gift lies in the way he continues to touch people's lives. He never fully left the music world. Even during his most difficult years, when he was out of the public eye, his music remained. Good Vibrations is still played regularly on the radio, Pet Sounds still inspires new listeners, and the memory of Smile continues to haunt the minds of music lovers and historians alike. His creative genius has outlived the years of struggle and mental anguish that almost consumed him. Brian Wilson is also a living example of the power of redemption. His life story is not just about a musical prodigy who conquered the world. It is about a man who faced incredible adversity, both internal and external, and found a way to continue creating despite overwhelming odds. His comeback, the rediscovery of Smile, and his return to the stage as a performer in the late 1990s were nothing short of miraculous. For someone who had been lost to the world for so long, Brian's revival represented a triumph of the human spirit. Today, Brian Wilson is not just a figure of the past, he is an ongoing influence. He continues to inspire new generations of artists, not just through his music, but through his perseverance. Despite being in his late 70s, Brian still performs live, still creates, and still shares his love of music with the world. His recent projects, including his performances of Pet Sounds in its entirety, have drawn large, enthusiastic crowds, proving that the world still has a deep love for the music he created all those years ago. What makes Brian Wilson's legacy so powerful is its depth. He's not just remembered for a few catchy hits or a handful of popular albums. He's remembered for his heart, his soul, and the way his music has shaped the emotional landscape of popular music. His songs are not just entertainment, they are a window into the complexities of the human experience. They provide comfort in times of sadness, joy in moments of despair, and meaning in an often chaotic world. As we look back on Brian Wilson's career, we can see a story of someone who gave everything to his music. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of pain, moments of self-doubt, and periods of immense struggle. But through it all, Brian never lost his connection to the music. And now, as we celebrate his legacy, we are reminded of the power of art to transcend time and to heal even the deepest wounds. Brian Wilson's music has already changed the world, and it will continue to do so for generations to come. His legacy is immortal, and his influence will forever be a part of the fabric of modern music. As long as his songs are played and his music is heard, Brian Wilson's impact will never fade. As we come to the end of this journey, it's clear that Brian Wilson's story is one of triumph, not just over the challenges of fame, but over the challenges of the human experience itself. His music is a testament to the power of creativity, to the resilience of the human spirit, and to the transformative power of art. Brian Wilson's legacy is not just the music he created, but the lives he touched along the way. The world of music is richer, deeper, and more meaningful because of him. As we reach the end of our journey through the life and legacy of Brian Wilson, we find that his story is not just one of musical genius, but also of resilience, vulnerability, and personal growth. His music continues to inspire and connect with people around the world, and his legacy will forever be embedded in the fabric of popular culture. As Brian himself has shown, no matter the struggles we face, there is always the possibility of redemption, creativity, and the power to make a lasting impact. So, as you close your eyes tonight and drift into a peaceful slumber, remember the journey of Brian Wilson, the man who, through his music and his life, has left us a timeless gift. His songs, his story, and his spirit will live on, forever resonating in the hearts of those who continue to listen and to learn from his extraordinary journey.